In 1955, a new war erupted. The Vietnam War sparked a new era of militarism, vehicles and tactics. It also encouraged allied countries to help with the war effort. America, South Vietnam, Australia and many more countries were involved in helping the war effort against the communists. Now, let's take a deeper look at Australia's involvement in the war and much more. The First Indochina War saw Ho Chi Minh opposing French forces, resulting in the 1954 Geneva Accords. These Geneva Accords divided Vietnam into two in what was called the 17th Parallel. The North, also known as the Communist side of Vietnam, was led by former President Ho Chi Minh and the Soviet Union. The South was under French control. During the 60s, the United States was already helping and aiding French forces that were fighting against North Vietnam. But on August 2nd, 1964, in the Gulf of Tonkin, US Navy ships were hit by 3 Vietnamese motor torpedo ships. After the aggressive attack, the US will later go on to join a fight against the Communists. March of 1965 was the first deployment of 3,500 US soldiers arriving north of Saigon. The deployment of more soldiers dispatched to Vietnam was crucial. In 1962, the arrival of a much earlier team of 4,500 soldiers was the Australian Army Training Team. They started helping the French in South Vietnam during July and August of 1962. That date marks the original start of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War.
What do you think about sending troops to Vietnam?
I think it's a good idea. I think all countries should participate and help each other like that.
I think it's got to be done. I haven't got any choice at this stage.
Well, I suppose you have to really keep the communists out.
As shown in the video you've just watched, many Australians' perspectives on the Vietnam War thought it was a good idea to have the war, as it would eliminate the spread of communism throughout Asia. The domino theory supported this idea, as allied countries thought if one country would fall to communism, the surrounding countries would too. The overuse of firepower and poor tactics by the Americans made them very noticeable in the rough terrain of the Vietnamese jungle. The Australians, which took a different approach, were much more stealthier than the US soldiers. Their tactics, ambushing, constant patrolling and pursuing of the enemy were very effective.
I work with the Americans quite a bit. They're lovely people, but they're lousy soldiers. Over-equipped, overpaid. They have got everything new.
When they encountered combat, they would usually fight close quarters rather than long range because of the uncertain Viet Cong traps. The Battle of Long Tan, which is the most known battle Australians fought in, ended up being a significant victory for the Allies, with heavy casualties on the Vietnamese side. The battles of Coral Balmoral, Bin Ba, Operation Coburg were just some of the battles Australian soldiers fought in. It is important to remember that the Vietnam War was a complicated and varied fight, and the Australians participated in a wide range of support, patrol and other activities in addition to these significant battles. Back at home, Australia's public opinion about the war in Vietnam moved through several stages over the decade-long involvement. In the beginning, there was a largely disinterested public that paid little attention to a war that involved very few Australian soldiers, especially as they were members of the regular army engaged in a training role. At the same time, most Australians were wary of communism's spread through Asia. But during the war and near the end of the war, people got enraged about forcing young people to go and fight in the war. So, protests emerged.
The direction has now met the march coming from the Treasury Gardens.
Marching down the streets of Melbourne were 200,000 people protesting, as well as 300,000 people in New York City. The final army unit disbanded from Vietnam was on February 16, 1973. The Australians that fought in the Vietnam War will always be remembered for their sacrifices, dedication, and the enduring spirit of the ANZAC tradition. The Vietnam War was a largely complex war with many human casualties and the odd length of the war. The ANZACs will forever be remembered for their bravery.